created using Hayden Flour Mills flours, which they get from Sossaman Farms and a variety of farmers in the Phoenix area, along with BKW Farms in Marana. So I've created like 3 primary blends, a Sonoran blend, a Barrio blend, and a pizza blend. And so I also started a company called breadlessons.com, which is, like I said, showing people how to make breads at home using the different blends. And it's pretty exciting because a lot of people are catching on to it. And I sell a lot of flour through the bakery. And that's kind of small scale now. It's all hand packaged. But I definitely want to learn more about how to get the proper packaging so it could be marketed at different different areas in the community. So I'm here to learn more and about that.
Yeah, thanks, Don. That's really interesting what you're doing with locally sourced grains. I'm really in favor of that trend.
Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you.
But yeah, hopefully just explore it and move forward Barrio grains, because I think more people are becoming the DIY bakers, and so now people are excited that getting a local product. I think they feel more connected and a sense of pride. And not only that, but the wheats and the flours are so much better than what you can get in the markets. Yep. So
from an environmental standpoint, do you find that the wheats you're using that are grown in Arizona are more ecologically appropriate, lower water use, and resistant in that respect?
Yeah, I think I've done some projects with Tucson Water. We created even a short movie about the water use along with BKW Farms. And so some of these new varietals, especially some of the heritage wheats, requiring less water. And we're lucky to live in an area where these wheats are adaptable. A lot of different varietals of wheat, especially from desert climates, are it's kind of the things I've selected to grow here. Mm-hmm. So that from a water standpoint, yes, and also from just trying to reduce that carbon footprint. So from my bakery, the wheats are brought in from 100 miles or less, and with BKW 30 miles. So I'm not sourcing from huge warehouses across the country, which I used to do at the start. I started doing 10% back in 2011 when I worked with Native Seedsters on this grant, a local food promotion. Actually, it's a SARE grant, Sustainable Agricultural Research Education Grant, to explore the planting of white Sonoran wheat and chapalote corn. So we thought right then, wow, this gives an opportunity to, for food producers to grow or to get the local grains. So from my standpoint, I really believe in tightening the food chain, shortening that food chain. So we're not, let's see.
Oh dear. Technical issues.
Oh, we've lost Dawn.
Yeah. Oh man.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
You're back.
Okay. Yeah. So I'll try to get the video going. But yeah, to shorten the chain, the supply chain is really what I'm super interested in doing right now. So that creates a better environment. For me, I feel better. I talk to my community about that. So
awesome.
Yeah. Let me see if I can get the video. I might leave for just a second, but I'm going to come back.
No worries. Okay, let me introduce myself. My name is Sophia Montes. I work with Apex Applied Technology, and we're helping Don manage this grant. So this is a USDA funded grant. And one part of this grant is to not just help Don in his business, but also to help the local community, which is why we reached out to Professors Pihl and Professors Krumhar to do this food label info session in the hopes of being able to educate other people in our region and giving everyone a leg up. So how about professors, if you guys could introduce yourselves, and then we'll go ahead and everybody can introduce themselves, just do a quick word about yourself and what you're hoping to learn or why you're here.
You want me to start, Kim?
Go ahead, Tedley.
All right. My name is Tedley, Pihl like a banana. I am an assistant professor of practice over at the Nutritional Sciences Department here in Tucson at U of A. I've been there teaching food science, lecture and lab for about 3 years. Before that, I know it's hard to believe, but about 30 years worth of work for food companies across the country, large and small, and mostly involved in new product development work. And along with developing new products, which you guys do every day, we had to develop labels so that we could get those products out. So we would do both USDA and FDA type labels. So I am not an expert in regulatory nor a legal maven, but I have experience, and I think that's why Don reached out in and with developing food product labels. So my goal today is really your goal. I mean, what do you guys want to get out of that? We have a thick old deck we're going to walk through and try not to bore you, but give you the basics and overview and tools. We want to give you tools. We know you're very applied, you're trying to make things happen. So this is really all about you, and we'll talk because we can talk, but we want you to ask as well. We're going to focus a lot on not just labeling a commodity like a flour, but also value add products, breads, and things like that. So I hope that that's important and that speaks to you.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, my name's Kim Krumhar. I'm an adjunct professor there in the Department of Nutrition Science in U of A. I've been working to help Scott and some of the faculty on various projects the past 2 or 3 years. And most recently, I've started working on a project to build and equip a food laboratory over in a country called Oman. And we're about halfway finished with that project right now. It's a pretty exciting, dynamic project. My background is very similar to Tedley's. I've been in the food industry for 35 years now. I started out in snack food development, actually, with a company called Frito-Lay, and then moved gradually further into other kinds of product development with other companies, mostly in the nutrition area. I worked with Metagenics as their product development head for 6 or 7 years, and then I went to work for Herbalife and also developed their product portfolio over a period of about 10 years. So I ended up with my career in Nestle. I spent the past 9 years there working in frozen and chilled foods, product development, and nutrition science, mainly guarding the product integrity and the nutritional integrity of their products and trying to move them forward to more healthful formulations. And I've just fallen off contract with them over the past year, so I'm more or less working with the U of A now and a lot less with other companies.
Great, thank you. So we'll just go down the list. I'll ask you to introduce yourself and then just a short, intro and then what you're hoping to learn. Also, before we totally get going, is everybody okay with this being recorded and potentially being posted? We haven't 100% decided if it will be posted yet, but on the off chance it is, if everybody's okay with it being posted online. If not, please email me. Okay, so let's start with Rachel.
Hello, everyone. I'm very excited to be here today. I'm in the very, very early infant stages of my idea for my company to create a regional cocktail company for Tucson, a canned or bottled type alcoholic beverage.
Awesome.
I hope to learn more about that.
Thank you.
Wow.
Liz?
Hi, my name is Liz, and I work with Amanda Horton at Desert Provisions here in Tucson. And we are currently a specialty salt and spice company is our focus, but we're looking to expand, and I'll let Amanda kind of speak more to that when it's her turn. And so I'm here today to learn as we're bringing new products to market, what are best practices, what do we need for our toolkit to make sure that we're able to do it, efficiently, successfully, and to code, if you will. So looking forward to it.
Amanda, you go ahead then.
Hi, I'm Amanda Horton. I'm the owner of Desert Provisions. It's a kind of startup boutique specialty salt and spice business based here in Tucson. We started in 2017. And like Liz said, we have 7 products right now that we sell online and wholesale, and we're looking to expand into some other pantry-based items, and just wanted to, navigating the FDA and some of the food labeling stuff is a little daunting, and so just wanted to learn some best practices and how to navigate that process.
Great. Thanks for being here. Okay,
Thanks.
how about Sophia?
Hi, I'm Sophia Gonzalez. I'm with Startup Tucson. We just secured the USDA grant to bridge the tech gap with food producers. We are creating a startup food accelerator to level up agricultural producers in our city of gastronomy through technology, training, and tourism. It'll be an online platform, and then some web development services, as well as some business fundamentals. So super excited to be here, super excited to see you, Rachel. Rachel's amazing. Also, the way that she can pitch her company is super fun. So make sure to tune in and stay tuned for her canned cocktails. And then I'm here with our program manager, Kenesha Raymond. I'm not sure if she'll introduce herself, but she's here.
Great, thanks. Well, Kenesha, do you want to go ahead?
I was hiding out behind the scenes. I am Kenesha Raymond. I'm the program manager at Startup Tucson. I come from a food industry background. I was a cupcaker for some years, so I want to learn all the things so I can make sure that we're giving people good information as they're going through our fundamentals program.
Great. Rosemary.
Hi. Sorry. Hi, my name is Rosemary Garcia. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm actually a graphic designer, but with passion for food, and I've always wanted to be able to package my food and put it. But what interests me is I want to know how to do the labels on frozen food. And I want to put some good tamales in the freezer, and so my corn, I want to know how to freeze maybe some tamale kits or something, and that's what I want to do.
Great.
And so I got this email for you guys, and you guys let me in, so thank you for the opportunity.
We're happy to have you. And then John, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. John Levy. I worked with Don on business strategy, worked with Barrio Bread, and helped get that up and running into a commercial environment, and I'm working as we move into the grains environment to create local grain economy and successfully create a market for grain and flour. So excited to learn different nutritional and labeling requirements to help with that success.
Great. Well, thanks again, everybody, for being here. This is going to be exciting. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the professors. Let me set it so that you can share your screen, because I'm assuming you'll want to do that. But there. So yeah. I'll let you guys take over now.
Okay.
Okay, I'll start. We're going to go a little back and forth. Okay. That was really helpful, what we just did, so that Kim and I have some idea of what kind of products you guys are working with. It's kind of from soup to nuts, right? From cocktails to salt to bread, so quite a variety. Again, we're not experts, but we know a lot. I am a certified...
Was it Amanda? Are you doing the cocktails?
That's Rachel.
No, I think that was Rachel.
Yeah,
Rachel.
I am.
Yep.
I think that, your products are going to be under a completely different set of regulations than the foods that we're going to be talking about today. So just be aware that you are in a very special category, I think.
Right. Because you're alcohol, you're not FDA or USDA. In fact, is she ATF? I'm not even sure. What do you think you are, Rachel?
TTB.
Yeah.
Definitely one of them. there's a lot of acronyms, and I know that there's a lot of complications with the alcohol, but I'd like to start somewhere and get an idea of language and structure and formatting, and so
Okay.
I'm excited to go through it, even though I know alcohol throws a little wrench in the mix.
Yeah, Kim's right. I think the other things that I heard depends on the tamale, but a lot of it's FDA, and most of this, what we're talking about today, is FDA, and we'll talk about how they're different. So let's get started. So this is kind of what we're thinking about talking about today. A very brief background on the history of U.S. food labeling. So you have some idea of where we've been, where we are, and what's just happened. There are 5 basic things that are required on an FDA food label, and we'll make sure that you understand those 5. We're going to spend a lot of time on the nutrition panel. That's probably the most labor-intensive piece. We're going to define what those components are, and we will demo for you different ways to develop a nutrition panel. We'll touch briefly on health claims and some other types of claims. And more than anything, we want to provide you with resources that you can refer to in the future. So let's talk a little bit about the history so we have a better appreciation for where we are now. It wasn't until 1966 that the first Fair Packaging and Labeling Act, which was enacted as a result of public concern. Most acts of the government arise out of public concern, by the way. So this was the first time that a front and a back panel was required on every food label. It doesn't sound like much, but that was a lot. So here's sort of the basics. We won't spend a lot of time on that. In '73, the first nutrition facts label was regulated because nutritional claims were starting to be made in advertising or on labels themselves. And so some regulation was put against what a nutrition facts panel should look like. And also scientific knowledge was becoming greater, linking not just getting enough food, but getting the right foods, linking health and diet together. Here's a big one, 1990, and we call this NLEA. We don't call it nutrition labeling, we call it NLEA. And this is the cornerstone for all the nutritional labeling that we currently have. This became mandatory in '94. It takes a long time to develop food labels across the country. It is mandatory for all food labels, and we'll get into some exemptions, and voluntary for raw fruits, vegetables, and fish. This is FDA. FSIS, which stands for Food Safety and Inspection Services, is USDA, and they, along with FDA, came up with their own mandatory labeling for meat and poultry products. So sort of hand in hand, and they both became effective in '94. And claims became allowed in an orchestrated, organized way. But the main thing about NLEA is it gave us that really structured formatting that we almost take for granted now on our labels. That box is highly structured as far as the bolding, the spacing, the placement. And the reason is we want consumers to quickly be able to look for fat or calories or protein, depending on why they may be choosing that product. So that's the purpose of that highly structured format. Well, 1994 was a long time ago, right? So in 2016, the FDA has revised the Nutrition Facts Panel fairly significantly to make the information clearer. What they did is they actually did some consumer studies to determine what people were having problems understanding. And they tried to clean it up, simplify, make it clearer, and also supply information about nutrients that are frankly more important to us, like vitamin D instead of vitamin A. So that's what happened in 2016, and that panel became mandatory January of this year for large food manufacturers. You'll ask me, what's a large food manufacturer? $10 million or more in annual sales. Small businesses still have to make this conversion, but smaller companies have January of next year to do that. This is a busy slide, and I apologize, but it talks to exemptions, not from labeling, but from nutrition labeling. And I think there's one type of exemption. For more information, I'm going to say that a lot because there is a lot of information. This is all available on the web. There's what's called the CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations. And Title 21 pertains to food. And so when you see this is sort of the address on how to get to this information. So one type of exemption requires an annual form to be filled out. Another one, and this is again just for nutrition labeling, is if you gross less than $50,000. You don't need to file a notice with the FDA. This specifically states that bakery products sold directly to consumers from the location where they're prepared are exempt from nutrition labeling. It doesn't mean you don't need the other 4 things. Remember, there's 5 things total. And again, there's a couple of great links here with more information about exemptions.
Coffee and tea may also be exempt from nutritional panels as well because there's no nutrition.
Right, such a minor amount. Well, I wonder if salt and spices, other than the sodium content, which we should be aware of. Do you know anything about that, Kim? Probably we need to know.
I don't think it has to be labeled. Single ingredients often don't require it.
Exactly. So now I just threw this in here because I didn't know exactly what the audience would be, and I'm no expert in Arizona cottage food laws, but this is the link to get there. These were enacted in 2011, and they specifically are limited to baked goods, candies, and fruits, jams, and jellies. So if that's your area, you could look at cottage food laws. There's no sales limit but it's only intrastate. So if you make a baked good, you could be exempt, or you could be living under cottage food laws. And
sales would be pretty much out, I think.
Sorry?
Internet sales would be out.
It says there's no limit to sales.
Right, but sales on the internet.
Intrastate only. So yeah, I agree. That's probably not going to work unless you're only marketing to Arizona.
Yeah.
You need to register for this and obtain a food handler's card. And you still need to label, but very simply, and you don't need a nutrition panel, and you need to make this statement. So I don't know if that pertains to anybody in this room, but.
Sorry, just a quick question.
Yeah.
So if you're selling online, and can you not sell online if you have one of those labels? Or is it like you're careful about who you ship to, and you just have to check?
I'm not an expert on that, so I would feel uncomfortable saying.
I can weigh in just on what. Hi, this is Amanda, and we had a cottage food permit when we first started, but then when we started selling online, we moved into a commissary kitchen like Cook Tucson because we weren't allowed to sell online outside of the state without that.
Okay.
What
Thanks.
kind of label did you have to have then, Amanda?
We don't have nutritional information on our labels, and we were under the impression that we didn't need to. I can't remember all the stuff that FDA told us or what I read, but we've been operating under that premise.
It could be that your spice.
Under the financial limit, then
And it could be based on that, what was it, 50,000 or so, you know, it's not that, so.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe when we first started, but we're over that threshold. So maybe I need to look into it again.
All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about FDA versus USDA labels. They're really different. And how do you know what you are? So for example, if we're talking about tamales and we have more than this amount of poultry or meat, then we're going to roll into a USDA product. So think meat and poultry, eggs, that's USDA. And
sorry, does that mean like let's say it was a kit and it just had a tiny bit of meat in it? Would that be well, I'm not even trying to sell the meat, so never mind, it's okay.
Well, no. I think, you know, that's if it has more than this amount of meat. So if we cook this down, you know, if you're selling, I guess it would be 2% chicken or less, you're fine. So it's like if you were making
like a percentage
of the total.
Of the total?
Right?
Okay.
Of the total that you're selling.
Okay, because some of them will just be no meat at all, just cheese and green chili.
Right.
And then some will have some meat.
Right. Today we're mostly focusing on FDA because again, USDA is a whole nother game. USDA is different in that every USDA label that I've ever worked with must go to DC for pre-approval before printing. Kim, you can chime in with your experience on USDA.
That's correct. Usually there's a regulatory group that looks at that. They're kind of a legal regulatory group because it's so, rules are so different than FDA's rules. Also, often they have inspectors that come to your facility if you're selling under USDA.
Yes, very different. They'll be in, you know, the FDA could inspect you as well. They do surprise inspections, but USDA, if you're actually producing USDA, you need to have a USDA number for your production site. So it's a whole lot of more, it's more regulation with USDA.
Yep.
But FDA, you don't have to go to DC. You develop your label in good faith and keep your records. And
yep.
Yeah. Okay. This is a BKW label. Oops, sorry. And I just have it here because I want to talk about the 5 requirements for the food label. If you are not exempt, you'll have all 5. So there's a lot of stuff on this label and a lot of it's not required, but it's more marketing because of course this is a great billboard. But the product name is required and the product name has to be on the front. And the product name here is whole grain flour. It might be hard red wheat whole grain flour, but it's minimally whole grain flour. You must have your net weight. Sorry, down here, it's always at the bottom of the front panel. To the right on the information panel, you must have, and you guys probably know this to a certain extent, you must have your ingredient statement, your nutrition panel, and your manufacturer information. So those are the 5 things, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And along with ingredient statement is your allergen statement. So let's talk about each of these. This is actually an older label. And the way I can tell that is because this format is the old pre-2016 format. And Kim's going to tell you a little bit more about that when we get there.
I'm sorry, just to interject. I think Rosemary raised her hand.
Oh, sorry, I can't see that. So
yeah,
I can't chat either.
It's okay. I was hoping someone saw it, but I didn't want to interrupt. I just wanted to know if, probably not in this meeting, maybe you guys aren't doing it, but maybe you could have another meeting. I was wondering how I could find out more about like shelf life and preservatives or like frozen food, you know, because what would I need?
Yeah.
I might help you a little bit with that from my background. And just let me know. We could have a separate conversation about that or at the end of this presentation.
Okay, that'll be awesome. Thank you so much.
Great. That's excellent. Okay, here is another label that we had from Hayden Flour Mills. I don't see a nutrition panel. It might be that they're small enough. It might be on the back. I don't see it. But they have their name and their net weight, as well as their ingredient statement, allergens, and their SIG line, their manufacturer. So they have the 4 things. Let's talk some definitions real quick. PDP, principal display panel, it just means the front panel, this front panel. And then when you turn the box, so for example, I have my Ritz crackers here, and if I turn it to the right, that's called the information panel, which is always to the right of the PDP. Now, there's exceptions to every rule, right? There's funky shapes on packages, but generally, for example, on breakfast bubbles, this is the PDP, turn it to the right, and that's the information panel. The name is always on the PDP, on the front panel. And there's very prescribed names for products that have standards of identity. So if they have legal standards of identity, and you can go to, this link actually takes us out to the CFR, Code of Federal Regulations, which is on the web, free of charge. It takes us to bakery, and it talks about what actually is white bread, what is allowed in white bread, what is not allowed in white bread, the proper naming of white bread, because white bread has a standard of identity. So that is something that for your product, if it does have a standard of identity, you need to be sure that you read through the CFR and get those restrictions. So for example, these products, bread, white bread, rolls, they have standard of identities. The manufacturer information must be on that side. When you turn to the right, the information panel. Hayden Mills didn't have an information panel, so they've got everything on the front. That's okay. It's the name and the address of the manufacturer, unless the name given, if the name given isn't the actual manufacturer, it could be the distributor, and then you say manufactured for, if it's a co-packer, or distributed by. But consumers need a way to connect or communicate to the producer for obvious reasons if there's complaints. So this is the kind of information that's required on the information panel for the manufacturer. The net weight, just very logically, must be the weight of the contents. If it's solid, it needs to be weight. If it's liquid, it's volumetric. But it needs to be expressed, if it's solid, in both pounds and grams. It needs to be metric and pounds, the way it is. Okay, ingredient statement. That has to be on the same panel as the name and the address of the manufacturer. So those two labels both had that. It's usually on the information panel. The ingredient list starts with, and most people know this, with the in order of predominance or preponderance. So from the most to the least. If water is added but removed, it doesn't need to be. For example, my crackers, I'm probably down to 3% water. So water is not on my ingredient statement because my consumers aren't consuming it. It's the ingredient statement is the list of things that they'll be eating. So the water's been removed. In baking, many times you've removed some, so water is still on your ingredient statement. But just want you to know that. We want to talk in terms that consumers understand. So we want to use names that are common. So we don't say sucrose, we say sugar. You know, just think about the purpose of this label is to inform your neighbors who may not know anything about food. You can use and or labeling if you're using fats. Say you're making a tortilla chip and it might be cheaper for you to have corn oil one day, canola oil the next day. You can put both of those on the label and cover yourself. You could throw sunflower oil in there. You just need to do an and or. You mentioned rosemary chemical preservatives. You need the common name that people might understand, but then also the function. And the goal again is to get away from, for chemical sounding names, things that people don't understand. Now, Amanda knows spices better than I do, but a spice that acts as a color also has to be declared a color. So spice and coloring for paprika, for example. Does that jive with what you do, Amanda?
We just list the type of, like in our case, it's ground chilies that's in our spice, so that's what we list. And we don't have anything else added.
Yeah, that might be a little different than ground chilies in a tortilla chip where you're adding color and flavor into something else. Yeah, that's probably different.
Oh, right, yeah.
That's what I think. And then the allergen statement, really important, directly beneath the ingredient statement. Let's talk about the allergen statement real quick. Here's an example of an allergen statement. Oh, phooey. Every time I click, it goes, a contains wheat statement. I'm sure you're very familiar. Another act of 2004, again, as we're probably aware, allergies and food allergies appear to be on the rise. And Kim could speak to this, perhaps with some research. We're not sure, I'm not sure whether it's heightened awareness or if in fact food allergies are on the rise, but consumers are demanding that they know because of protection for their families. So FALCPA came about in 2004 and mandatory in 2006. And that speaks to the big 8 allergens, which are those allergens that account for about 90% of all food allergies. There are things, people have food sensitivities. This speaks more to the big food allergies. And these are the big 8. And of course, wheat is one of those. Milk, soy, egg, wheat, fish, tree nuts, peanuts, and just crustacean shellfish, not mollusks. So, and this just states if you use a tree nut, you need to declare what type of nut it is on your label. If you were to use fish or shellfish, you need to say what kind of fish or shellfish it is. So you could either list it, you can provide this information in your ingredient statement. For example, you could say whey parens milk, or you can say down on the bottom contains milk, or you can do both. So those are the ways. Okay.
Just a couple of comments.
Back on that, I have a question as well.
Yeah.
Okay. First comment is, Tedley, you're correct. There has been quite a considerable increase in food allergy that includes anaphylactic shock associated with wheat, soy, peanuts specifically. Sometimes honey can be a lead to this, but it's been probably 20 years since that trend started. There are some theories as to why this is happening. Some of those theories revolve around micronutrient deficiencies that Americans might be developing. Even though we have high calorie intake, we have unbalanced nutrient intake, and one of those nutrients appears to be vitamin D. It's associated with high incidence of allergy.
Interesting. Okay. There was another comment?
Yes. So my question is, if your space includes, someone who's working with the food, who brings a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for lunch, is there supposed to be some kind of note, may contain wheat?
That's a really good comment. So FDA frowns upon saying may contain, and the reason is what we should be doing is proper sanitation in our facilities. So avoiding cross contact is really what's paramount through proper food safety and handling practices. By saying may contain, so you could say may contains all 8. You know, so-and-so brings shrimp in their Tupperware. That encourages perhaps not adhering to good GMPs, good manufacturing practices, and proper safe handling. Plus, for those people that have that allergy, it limits them on one more thing that they can't consume. So
it's the easy solution for food manufacturers. Yep.
It's a what, Kim?
It's a very easy solution for food manufacturers to put this clause on everything they make.
Right.
It may contain X, Y, Z, and Q.
It sounds like you're doing the consumers a favor, but truthfully, we should be adhering to our GMPs, and this should not be an issue. Somebody having a sandwich in the break room should never impact your production line.
Right.
Yeah.
We also had a question in the chat. So just to confirm, if you don't have any of these 8 allergens, you don't need an allergen statement?
It is only these 8, correct.
Right.
Yep.
And there are GMPs for segregation of different products containing allergens. And if your food facility is making peanuts on the same line or the same factory area where you're making foods, let's say for sensitive populations like children and toddlers, you're probably going to want to segregate those food lines and clean up and keep them separated.
And you would run peanuts on Friday, and you would run your cleaner products on Monday. And as Kim says, you would have a cleanup between. Yeah. What is the what? I'm not sure who asked that question, but what is it that you're thinking that possibly could have needed to be labeled?
Hi, it was Amanda that posted that. Nothing in particular. I was just curious, just for future food production and whatnot. But I did have a question about, sometimes you see on labels like that the actual food doesn't have any of those 8 allergens, but it says processed in a food facility, that processes tree nuts or something. So what are the requirements on when that has to be used if the lines are separated, I guess?
That's a great point. The reason why they're saying that for, say, tree nuts and some other, they're microallergens. The tree nuts, the protein in tree nuts, maybe just a few micrograms can cause a person to develop anaphylactic shock. So it doesn't take much. It can be something airborne dust almost that can get into another process area and cause the issue. So even though they might have cleaned up all these areas, if they don't have proper segregation for their air conditioning system and their ventilation, they can get small amounts of these contaminants into their product lines. So the legal departments are often requiring companies to put that on their labels.
So it's not really an FDA regulation. It is the manufacturer deciding that and it could be to inform, but it could be to protect them, or it could be they don't have confidence in their cleaning, but it's not regulated by FDA that it be stated.
Right.
That's the manufacturer adding that on there. And some of these allergies are worse than others, right? I mean, peanut is a more severe allergy.
Peanuts and tree nuts. Yep. Peanuts
and tree nuts. And to Kim's point, I mean, if you have a sensitive population perhaps as well that you're serving with the product, maybe it is better to inform, right? But it should be done cautiously, because for the obvious reason, it is possible to run lines in a clean fashion. So, but I don't know. They can do, and it's all about the protein, right? That's what we're reacting to. So they could do swabs, and even if they've done proper cleaning and their swabs get a hit on ppms of tree nut, maybe they've decided from a legal standpoint and a informative standpoint to label, but that's not an FDA requirement.
Thanks, that was very helpful.
Yeah, good discussion. Okay, so we kind of hit on the easy ones. The product name, we need to go to the CFR, make sure that we're adhering to the standard of identity, manufacturing, address and location, net weight, even ingredient statements, a little more complicated. This is where we get really complicated with the nutrition panel, right? So the nutrition panel must be on the information panel. FDA has not stated, I think this is important, how a company should determine the nutrient content for labeling purposes. What I mean by that is FDA has not regulated that you must analyze a certain number of products to come up with your nutrition panel. You can use database numbers. You can use what we used to call Handbook 8, USDA database numbers. Kim's going to talk about softwares you can use. So what I want to say, I mean, you can submit your product at a sampling rate of your choosing to a lab to have them analyzed, to have the products analyzed. But you can also use a reliable database with the information, and you may have to at sometimes get the information from a supplier, and you can gin up or create the nutrition panel without actually having to do the testing and for the FDA.
And the FDA does recognize the validity of using those databases, but it doesn't really get a company off the hook.
Yeah, yes, because if, I don't know why, there's different reasons. Say a competitor sees a product and questions your nutritional analysis, they could call the FDA and say, hey, you know what, I think you should take a look at that. That product seems wacky. And the FDA can then conduct analysis, a composite of 12 units from, I'm not exactly sure of their sampling plan, off the shelf. And they can conduct analysis, and they will hold you to, well, why do you think you have 11 grams of protein? Our tests show there's 2. So they can certainly check you.
And generally, you get a letter like that, you're going to send them, the rational basis that you use for developing the product, which is the records you keep, what database you used, and what ingredients you selected in that database, and any other information. Maybe you've got proprietary information from say a supplier. A supplier gave you a specification and a C of A, and those are all valid tools you can use. But FDA will probably not not recall your product. They'll probably just recommend that you develop better methods to validate your nutritional panel.
Right. If it isn't a food safety issue,
Yep.
but it's sort of misbranding or mislabeling, yes. So yep. I just have a few options listed here. Kim's going to talk about Genesis. I'll talk a little bit about a homemade template that I use. Do you want to share screen, Kim, or do you want me to cue? It's up to you.
Let's see if I can share the screen. Hang on a second. You know what? Go ahead. Just stay on this slide for a moment.
Sure.
We had a change in the labeling regulations in 2016, and so companies had quite a lot of time to think about how they would deal with these regulations. In fact, most larger companies commented on the impact of these regulations, and in some cases were able to get some things changed or modified. But since 2016, we've had now 4 years to get used to the new regulations and adapt strategy for meeting them. For smaller companies, sometimes this is very difficult to do because they've spent quite a bit of time developing products and developing their labels, and then they have to invest time and effort into doing this over again. I think you guys are kind of in that situation right now where 2021 is looming, and these regulations covering smaller companies are coming into effect next January. So if you meet the criteria, the financial criteria that Tedley mentioned, it's a good idea to start thinking about having to make these changes and going from the original label on the far left to the new label that's in the center. And I'll go over briefly what those changes are. First of all, they're trying to make these labels look a little bit more impactful and easier to read and digest at a glance, because they're really intended for people who are in a store who pick up a package and look at it for 5 seconds and make a decision on whether it's something they want to buy or something that's helpful for their family. So you can see that in the new label, there's a larger typeface they've used for the calories. It's about double the size of the old typeface. So you can see it right away. And they've done the same thing for underneath nutrition facts. You see the serving size is amplified. It looks bigger and bolder. Now, underneath the calorie content in the new label, you can see that there have been some changes in the way that the macronutrients, or the major nutrients, are laid out. The dietary fiber, for instance, we don't really require showing soluble and insoluble fiber any longer. We can just show dietary fiber, and it's under the carbohydrate fraction. Now we also have sodium, and sodium has changed a little bit from the previous label in that we've changed the requirement for sodium. They've reduced the daily recommended amount of sodium. On the far bottom of this label, you can also see that there are 4 micronutrients that are now required that you actually have to state in the labels. In the previous version, there were different micronutrients as vitamin A, C, calcium, and iron. But now it's vitamin D, calcium, iron, and potassium. And potassium is a kind of a rising star in the nutrition world. Because Americans don't consume a lot of fruits and vegetables these days, they have quite a deficiency in potassium. It's caused some health issues that have really started to become chronic. Tedley, let's move to the next slide.
I was being fancy, but now I got to go now. Sorry.
There.
Yep, there we go.
There we go. Okay.
Right.
So there are 2 basic types of labels that now we can use. The vertical label. Oops. Let's go back again.
Oh, sorry. I'm just trying to erase that. I shouldn't play with things I don't understand. Okay, go back. Keep talking. I'll get there. Okay.
Here we go. Okay, there are 2 basic kinds of labels that are used, in food products and mainly in bread products. This vertical label you see on the left can get a little bit challenging because it has such a long vertical profile, and so there are problems with the package dimensions oftentimes. And on the lower screen, you can see a kind of a horizontal label that you'll often see on breads and rolls and other kinds of bagged packages. And this horizontal label that you see can be split up. Hold on. Oh, I see. Yeah, Rosemary. Let's see. Your text message is actually blocking my slide. Okay, got it. Thanks. So anyway. As I said before, the mandatory micronutrients that you have to put on labels are potassium, iron, vitamin D, and calcium. And the reason why we've had a change in this and that these are become mandatory is because potassium and vitamin D are considered to be critical micronutrients now. They've been associated with pretty significant problems with the health of the U.S. population. We've also had an increase in the calcium DV because of the same associations with osteoporosis and other calcium-related chronic diseases. Iron is still an issue, particularly with teenage children and with women in reproductive age. It continues to be an issue. So the FDA, the USDA, and the U.S. Academy of Medicine have outlined, have identified these as really critical nutrients that we really need to report. Hold on, excuse me. Sorry. One of the things that has happened as a result of these changes in the micronutrients is we've seen fewer and fewer companies reporting other micronutrients like vitamin A and vitamin C. All right. Some of the other key micronutrients that we really should consider labeling for specific kinds of customers might be B12 and zinc, magnesium, and even choline, because these are all micronutrients that are associated with health outcome in Americans and have been noted to be in deficiency status. One of the things you should notice is that if you supply at least 10% of a micronutrient, you can make a claim for that, and the claim is usually good source. And if you move up to 20% of the daily value or RDI, you can make a high claim or an excellent source claim for these micronutrients. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. Another change that we've seen in the past 4 years with the new regulations is that the FDA has modified their RACC numbers. And what a RACC is, it's a reference amount as commonly consumed. That would be normally called the serving size. One of the reasons why the FDA has gotten so concerned about serving size is that, has everyone here seen this film called Super Size Me from some years ago, where a guy decided to experiment on changing his diet to a fast food diet, very large serving sizes, and was able to successfully gain quite a lot of weight in a short period of time. And that's the reason for FDA's review of RACC sizes and why they adjusted things over the past few years. Let's see. Let's go over to the next slide. Okay. This is actually a copy of the RACC guidelines that we can get from the FDA website. For instance, if you take a look at the bottom column, it says flours and cornmeal. The reference amount there is currently 30 grams. That's considered to be a kitchen measure that's commonly used, and that actually hasn't changed. So, from Don, from your standpoint, you don't have to make any big changes on that.
Yeah.
Let's go to the next. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. Here's some other bakery products that you might want to take a look at as well. The standard loaf bread, baked bread, typically will have a RACC serving size of 50 grams. And what that really means is if you have let's say you've got a loaf, it's maybe a 1 pound, 1.5 pound loaf. And you're slicing it, you got maybe 10 to 15 slices per loaf. The FDA says, well, the serving's going to be 50 grams, and probably your average for 2 slices might be 24, 25, 26 grams on average. And so most bread manufacturers will be using a slice size or weight somewhere in that range. And that will form the basis for the nutritional panel. And there's some rules on how to manage, whether you have smaller slices or much bigger slices. It gets kind of detailed, and we can take a little bit more closer look at that in a moment. Tedley, can you switch to the next slide, please? Okay. So. FDA has given us some examples here. Here's for instance, if your slices on a sliced bread loaf, if they're 24 grams, then your your serving would be 48 grams. You're pretty close to the 50-gram target. And so they allow you to use that to develop the per serving claims. And you can see how one of your competitors here, it's Nature's Harvest, they have a 22-gram slice, which is a 44-gram serving size. And they've set this up on a kind of a horizontal side-by-side label where they show per serving and per slice. And this is kind of a nice way to show this information to retail customers. It's very clear, and there's a lot of detail in here. And you can see on the bottom of the panel that, again, they got vitamin D, calcium, iron, and potassium are displayed here as per the new rules. So this is the new label. This is the kind of label required after January 1st. When the slices for a loaf of bread get larger and larger, then the FDA starts to says, well, maybe we should consider each slice to be a serving. And when it gets up to be like 67% of the RACC, then basically a slice is a serving. So it's kind of a sliding scale, whether it can be, 2 or 3 slices per serving, or beyond a certain size, it becomes each slice is a serving.
Sorry.
Okay. Can you back up a little bit? No, go forward again, Tedley.
Yep, hold on.
No. Okay, there we go. So we talked about daily values a little bit and how they're used on a label. And what the heck is a daily value? Basically, the scientists and nutritionists that have been working with foods for the past now 60 to 70 years have developed a really good idea of what nutrients are actually needed to sustain life and to maintain health. And the macronutrients are, protein, carbohydrate, fat, and also include fiber now. And they place sodium under a macronutrient status as well. And the daily values are set up to provide guidance on what is a healthful level of these macronutrients to have in a daily intake. For instance, fat has moved up a little bit. There's less concern about having high fat in the diet, but more concerned about the type of fat. Also, protein has been maintained at about 50 grams a day, and carbohydrate around 275 grams a day. So they've set these numbers up after many years of research, and they've proven to be pretty good at predicting how well people do from long-term health status. They review these DVs every 5 years. It's by the Food Nutrition Board with the National Academy. And sometimes they make changes, and that's where these 2016 changes came from. It was a full review of where we were as a country. We were starting to get kind of big. And they decided that we need to make some major changes in the way we eat. So 2016 came, we've had 4 years to adapt to it. Let's go to the next one, Tedley. Okay, this is a chart showing the macronutrients, the grams of fat. So we've gone from 67 up to 68 grams of fat as kind of a daily allowance. Saturated fat is 20 grams a day. Cholesterol stayed the same. Total carbohydrates stayed the same at 275 grams. Now the change was in sodium. It went from 2,400 milligrams down to 2,300. It doesn't sound like a very big change, but if you're a food scientist working in the snack industry, every milligram of sodium is important because product taste changes dramatically with changes in sodium content. Also, another big change is in the recommended dietary fiber. It's such a critical macronutrient in our diets. The average American only gets about 10 to 12 grams of dietary fiber, so we're way off. And they really wanted to emphasize the importance of dietary fiber and the importance of having whole grains in the diet and having less refined grain. Protein stayed the same. Last thing, most importantly, added sugars. Americans have been consuming enormous amounts of added sugars, not just sugars we add ourselves to foods like sugar and coffee, but sugars are used as bulking agents in many food products. And they have functional properties, taste properties, and food preservation properties that are very important. So they became very commonly used across many types of food products, from snacks to chilled and frozen foods, in all kinds of desserts, and the fact that they're cheap made it even worse. So sugar is everywhere. Now we feel that limiting sugar intake, added sugar intake, to 50 grams a day, which is only 200 calories, is important for maintaining long-term health and reducing your risk of developing diabetes and obesity over time. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, these are some of the micronutrients. Vitamin A and C used to be universally put on labels. Today, not so much. The Institutes of Medicine found after research that almost no one in America is deficient in vitamin A and C. But we are deficient in calcium, vitamin D, iron, and potassium. Those are the keys. Everything else here would be considered to be a voluntary nutrient on a label. That it's good to have. You can make a nutrient content claim. You might be able to interest some consumers in some of these micronutrients, but they're not mandatory, except for the 4 that I identified. And there have been some changes among these micronutrients as well. In general, most of the B vitamins, which includes riboflavin, niacin, thiamine, and folate, most of those vitamin intake levels were harmonized to the European vitamin intake levels in 2016, except for folate. We stood firm on folate. It's still 400 micrograms a day.
I'm sorry. There was a quick
question.
yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I saw before it's added sugars. Is there a distinction between added and naturally occurring sugars in a product for labeling requirements?
Sure, there is. The FDA does not challenge the use of products that contain natural sugars, and you need to have those on the labels, a part of the sugar and the carbohydrate fraction, but you don't have to call them added sugars because they're naturally occurring. You know, apples, apple juice, that's naturally occurring. So you can avoid having the stigma of putting that on the label as an added sugar.
Terrific.
So let's,
Thank you.
Good question.
go ahead. John, go ahead. Okay. Tedley, go ahead. Okay, here's, in addition, some of the microminerals. As I mentioned before, iron is considered to be a key shortfall nutrient, and so we have protected that, and it's mandatory. But this is the remainder of the micronutrients that go down the line through magnesium, zinc, selenium, copper. All are essential for life, but almost no American is deficient in these, so they're not mandatory on the label. Okay, next slide. All right, let's talk just a little bit about added sugars, and this has become a really challenging point with many food manufacturers. It's been very difficult for them to meet these the criteria for added sugars in some cases. You can see what's happened. If you look down this label on the left, added sugars occupies a space just above protein, and anything above 20% of the percent daily value is considered to be a real negative from a nutrition standpoint. and it's something that consumers are starting to look for. Many people will not actually purchase products that have a positive number in the added sugar box. So be aware that this is becoming quite a impediment to sales, and companies need to find ways to reduce added sugars, or to find products that don't require that they label the sweetener as added sugar. And you're all familiar with the rounding rules. If you have less than 1 gram of added sugar, you can say less than a gram, or if it's less than 0.5 grams of added sugar, it can be 0. They kind of police this kind of carefully, so be a little careful when you're making those kinds of 0 sugar claims. Okay, next slide. Okay, so what is an added sugar? Well, you might think that you can get away with adding things like agave syrup and not call it sugar, but it's actually high in fructose. So we're kind of stuck there. Honey is considered an added sugar if you're adding it to a formulation for sweetener. Pure maple sugar, invert sugar, which is enzyme modified corn sugar. Lactose is not even sweet, but that's considered to be an added sugar if you add it to a formulation. Now, if lactose is present in a milk product, a natural milk product, if it's naturally present in the milk product, it does not have to be considered to be added sugar. But if you add it for some reason, maybe you want it as a fermentation medium, maybe you want it for browning, that would be an added sugar. And trehalose, who's ever heard of trehalose? Nobody. Okay. Okay. So what are the things you can do to move away from added sugar? You can start to use more fruit purees. You can use single strength fruit juices of all kinds to replace some of the water content of a formulation. And you could probably even cook those compositions. Say it's a sauce containing fruit juice, you might be able to cook the composition up a little bit and form a reduction that's a little bit sweeter. But Tedley, I think we might be entering a gray zone if we start doing that. But I don't know. Do you know anything about that?
I don't. I know, because it's like you're taking a concentrate at that point. So. Yep.
But you should start with it. If you want to use sweetener, use a single strength juice. You might be able to make a reduction, as a part of your formulation and processing, and then add sweetness naturally that way, and get to your formula endpoint without adding cane sugar or beet sugar. Everyone is aware of the synthetic sweeteners, which we're trying to get away from. There are some really interesting non-synthetic sweeteners like monk fruit and stevia, and even a licorice kind of extract that, if properly formulated, these can be very good. The monk fruit syrups and powders are actually getting better all the time, and I recommend that you look at those if you need to have additional sweetness but can't afford to be adding white sugar. Let's go to the next slide.
I'm just going to comment on the allulose because it is so interesting. Allulose is identified as a monosaccharide, which is, it just floors me. So it's a new monosaccharide. It's from figs and dates. It's considered not synthetic. I'm not going to say natural. And more importantly, it's not labeled as an added sugar.
It's magic.
Sorry, go ahead. So go ahead.
It's magic. It's
magic.
Sweet sugar. It has all the functional properties of sugar in formulation. It's a good bulking agent. Sweetness almost as high as white sugar, but it's not metabolized as sugar.
Wait, it's crazy. All right, let's go to the next one.
Metabolized as sugar. Yep. So if you're going to make some recipe in your plant and you want to add additional sweetness with a concentrated fruit juice, which everybody wants to do because it's more convenient to use concentrated pear juice or concentrated apple juice or concentrated pineapple juice. It's very convenient to do that, but the FDA is right there watching you, and they want to make sure that you only use that part of a juice concentrate that represents what would be naturally in the juice. So if you're gonna, for instance, if you're gonna use apple juice is 11% sugar. But if you want to use concentrated apple juice, that's 40% sugar. FDA will let you take the 11% of the sugar, and that's just natural sugar. Okay, but the rest of it, the other 29%, that has to go into the box that says added sugar. I'm sorry to say. I wish there were a way around that, but I don't know of a way around it.
And it's a level playing field. I mean, everybody has to do it. So,
yep.
But again, it's the concern of, and I don't know, Kim, but I'm thinking more of even food products fed to children, where, you may be using, I'm not saying bread, but I'm saying, popsicles or something, when you say it's got fruit juice, but really it's got a lot of concentrated sugar in there too.
Right. Yeah. So we don't have a solution to this issue right now, but you have to keep track. If you're using concentrates, if you're using straight single strength juices, you got to keep track of what you're adding to the product, because if somebody complains about your sugar levels and the FDA says, hey, how do you calculate your sugars and your added sugars? You kind of have to have that information so that you can discuss it with them and let them know that you had a rational basis for what you did. And usually they'll be okay with that. But if you don't have the records, they kind of are not okay with that. And then you end up getting slammed. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Dietary fiber is another thing that's become complicated, I'm sorry to say. Before 2016, it was a free-for-all. Naturally occurring fiber that you might find in whole grains was always includable as dietary fiber. But then there were dozens of specific ingredients and extracts and synthetic dietary fibers and retrograded fibers and isolated fibers and resistant fibers. It got to the point where everybody and their brother was making a specific fiber ingredient that had some particular benefit that they were promoting at the trade shows. So those days came to an end in 2016 when the FDA said, okay, stop. You can take a fiber claim for everything that's naturally occurring fiber found in foods, fruits, grains, but let's take a break on some of the synthetic and isolated fibers for a while, except for a few selected isolated fibers that they set out. They actually identified the ones that they thought were okay. And let's look at the net. Well, before we go, let me just say, yeah, that's fine. Let's talk a little bit about what they did. So what is a dietary fiber? Well, the intrinsic fiber would be what you might find in the cell wall, the seed coat, and the bran of say wheat or oats or barley. And those are okay. They've never had an issue with taking credit for any of that. Whole wheat bran, whole wheat fiber is fine. No issues with that. Then they start talking about these isolated and synthetic fibers. And they defined the isolated and synthetic fibers as those non-digestible compounds with 3 or more sugar units. Okay, you guys know that fiber is made from sugar. Okay, it's just that these sugar units, these three or longer sugar units, are linked together in ways that our stomach and our intestines can't digest. So they just basically pass through. They end up in the midgut and the lower gut, where microbial action can ferment some of them, or in some cases, microbial action cannot ferment them, and they just become insoluble fiber and those are for regularity. FDA defined beta glucan from oats, psyllium husk, cellulose guar gum, pectin, locust bean, and believe it or not, HPMC, methocel. Those are okay. Those are isolated and synthetic fibers that FDA has been okay with right since 2016. I think that the companies that make these products really had their act together, and they supplied the data and the clinical data to the FDA, and the FDA they just let it go. It's okay. And then a little later on, we started looking at other materials that were, kind of fractionated cell wall fibers, including alginates and inulin and FOS, chicory root fiber, which is a kind of inulin, cross-linked starch. It used to be that starches that were modified, with phosphates, we didn't think of those as dietary fibers, but if you cross-link starch enough with enough phosphate, it becomes poorly digestible. And they brought the data forward. You can claim that that's a fiber now. Polydextrose is a fiber. Fibersol 2, which is a resistant maltodextrin, and glucomannan from konjac. Those are all acceptable now. The FDA said they're fine to use. Now, surprisingly, there are some fibers that have been used for 100 years, and the FDA says they're not fibers. Gum arabic, for instance, in the beverage industry, everybody uses gum arabic. It's a standardized bulking agent. It's fantastically functional. It has incredible food technology uses, but no one has come forward with its physiological benefits yet in a way that the FDA will agree with. So that's a challenge. Carrageenan as well. Carrageenan is used to stabilize milk beverages and to stabilize emulsions. Carboxymethylcellulose, that kind of surprised me. CMC. Caraya gum, retrograde starch, RS3, that probably will be next, Tedley. I think they're probably going to approve that in the next year or two. Mm-hmm. But even if you're using one of these unapproved fibers, they're food usable, they're food safe. You have to list them as carbohydrates. Mm-hmm. But you can't take fiber credit if you're using carrageenan and gum arabic and Kerala gum. Sorry. Okay. There's another area the FDA has defined. It's called isolated plant cell fibers. Those are interesting. And there's a huge number of them. Apple fiber, citrus fiber, barley fiber, corn hull fiber, cottonseed fiber, sugar beet fiber. All of them are acceptable now. I think this is a final rule now. Tedley, do you know if this is finalized?
I don't know.
Okay. They have a term. Yeah, they have a term the FDA likes to use. They say they exercise enforcement discretion. Now, what does that mean? Well, I think it means that they're going to give it a pass, and as long as you don't abuse it or overclaim, they're okay for right now. But enforcement discretion means the FDA is tentatively approving these, but they might change their mind. So this huge range of fibers is acceptable for use now, and probably will continue to be acceptable for use, because by the time they say that they're exercising enforcement discretion, that means that they're just about giving up.
Yes.
And it's going to go forward. They're going to not have any issues with it. So those are probably acceptable to use. Now, when you're making a fiber claim, if you guys want to make a product that's rich in wheat, say white Sonoran wheat flour and red winter, red spring wheat, and some other fibers, you might want to jack up the fiber content, like some of these bread companies that are adding cellulose, like Solca flock. That's what they're using, putting Solca flock in bread now. But if you're going to be ramping up your fiber content using one of these synthetic or isolated fibers, you have to be very careful. You got to keep records and make sure that you can kind of defend your fiber claim if they come and ask you questions about it. So let's go to the next one, Tedley. Okay. We've got two different ways that we're looking at developing label claims. One of them is Tedley has a Excel spreadsheet, which I think she's going to take us through, and I have a Genesis database, which I like to use because I'm really lazy and I haven't developed my own Excel spreadsheet. But what Genesis has done, they have hired somebody to develop their own proprietary Excel spreadsheet, and they've buried it inside this program. So it takes the hour of work that Tedley has to do, and they've compressed that down to like 5 minutes. I find that these automated spreadsheets inside Genesis and similar programs really help the product developer. If someone in marketing comes in and says, I got to prototype something for the CEO next week, and here are my 3 ideas. Can you run some prototypes for me, and come back to me and let me know what a label is going to look like? And you've got 3 days to do that. This is a tool that allows you to actually survive that 3-day period of time and not go crazy. So I recommend that if you're going to be in a situation where you're short-staffed and you've got time pressure and you've got a lot of prototypes, you consider maybe getting one of these spreadsheet programs. And we'll talk more about this later. But I put their address and their phone number at the bottom of the slide, and you can contact them. They might even let you look at something for a month or so as a kind of a test to see if it helps you in your business. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Tedley, where are you going to take this one?
Yes, I'll go ahead and what I want to make sure, can you guys see this XLS spreadsheet? Is that what you're seeing right now? Okay, perfect. So I worked for a pretty small company, and we made a wide variety of snack foods for some of the larger food companies in the country because we were co-packers. But we didn't have a lot of money. So ESHA Genesis software program is probably the #1 software used by food companies, but it is not inexpensive. There's lots of benefits to Genesis, and Kim will talk about those. He'll do a quick demo with Genesis, and I can show you a quick poor man's XLS approach that I would take. And this is actually lifted from my old sort of place of business. So the first thing, I'm just going to walk through a very simple, my goal here is to come up with a label for a white bread, a very simple. And that's the other thing. If you have a pretty simple formula, you can probably do this. If it's getting complicated with added sugars and you're using all kinds of
sub-recipes.
What?
Sub-recipes, sauces, and things like that, and combining separate, oh man.
Right. With lots of considerations. So here, starting from left to right, I've got my ingredients in my dough. Simple recipe, household measure. I convert that into grams so I can put it in percentages. I then do, this is all just algebra, of course, and then I do an assumption about my bread that I'm going to end up with a 35% moisture bread. I start with a 43%, so I just do a yield calculation here to come up with how much water and what the percentages are of the other 4 ingredients. And here's my baked bread. So here's my formula for my baked bread. From this formula, I can put my ingredient statement together, right? I can take my largest, so I've got my whole grain flour. If I jump over here, whole grain flour, water, salt, sugar, and yeast. I could also say whole grain flour, water, less than 2%. You guys probably know this. I apologize if you do. And I can play with these ingredients. Any ingredients under 2% no longer need to be in the order of predominance. So if I want to make it look like I don't have a lot of sugar, I could put that at the very end. So you can play a little bit here. So that's my very simple ingredient statement, my very simple allergen statement, and my product name, my whole grain bread. Now what I'm going to have to do, and I decided to buy my flour from BKW. So I took the information. What I now do is rely on supplier information, and they will provide me with the nutrients in the ingredient that I'm purchasing from them. And that's what Kim said, something about a COA, a certificate of analysis, or a finished product specification. You can get that from your suppliers. I would get it from BKW. And why do I need that? Because now I'm going to jump into, I'm going to jump into, this looks like a lot, but it really isn't. The yellow are inputs. So I have my 5 ingredients, my whole grain flour, my water, salt, sugar, and my yeast. And I have the percentages that I just calculated for each of those. They add up to 100. And I have the information that they've supplied me with from calories all the way down to iron. And I input that. Very simple Excel sheet. I then tabulate what does that look like on a 100-gram basis. And then I use my serving size. It's interesting because I always thought RACC was serving size, but it's more a recommendation from FDA.
It's a target.
It's a target to try to keep food companies similar, and yet there's some diversity. So in this case, I am using the 50 grams as my serve size. And so then I just adjust to how many calories per serving using that serving size. That's because my 2 pieces of bread weigh about 50 grams. He's already talked about RACC. That's great. And then you go through the rounding rules here for grams. So as you can see, we'll go through these rounding rules pretty much as you would expect. Added sugars, I've got less than 1 gram, like Kim mentioned. So this data is, and I've got my percent DVs as well. What I didn't get from BKW was the potassium or the vitamin D. So I would have to call him and get that information special because I need that. That's probably only coming from the wheat flour. So now I have my numbers that I can input into a very simple, let me bring this one up. And I've made this, but so then I just input that to see generally what my nutrition panel would look like. This is not FDA formatted. What I would need to do would be to work with a printer who is aware of the leading, the kerning, the depth and bolding of the lines so that they would print the label according to FDA guidelines. But for me as a product developer, it would give me some idea of how my added sugars are looking and such. And so that's a really simple approach using XLS. But Kim is going to, and what that also means is I need to keep up on rounding rules. I need to keep up on the DV as it changes because I don't have the software generating that for me. All right. Okay.
So I just want to interject. It is now 4:35, and we are hoping to, give people a chance to ask some questions.
Okay.
So if we could start maybe like within 10 minutes.
I'm going to go through this very, very quickly now, Sophia.
We are about done. Yes.
Awesome. Thank you.
That's great, Sophia.
I'm going to take a look at these 2 products. One is the white Sonora wheat. The other is just kind of a model, kind of a sandwich made using a whole grain wheat bread. Let's go to the next one. Okay, here's an example of the Genesis format that I used for the white Sonora wheat. since this is a blend of two kinds of wheat, that's, I guess, a proprietary blend. I don't have the breakdown of that, but I did find all the nutritional data was on the USDA food data website, which surprised me. It's kind of amazing. Thank you for doing that, Dawn. It made it easier. So I took all the data that was on the USDA website and I entered that and created an ingredient inside Genesis for this product on like a 100-gram basis, and then selected the serving, which for this particular one, the RACC is 30 grams, and then generated the spreadsheet, which sees as a three color bars, and this goes all the way to the right, probably about 3 feet. It goes off the screen, and it includes all the micronutrients, the macronutrients, and you can program what factors you want this Genesis software to actually evaluate. And once you've decided how you want to set up the label in terms of the serving size, the RACC, the quarter cup, or whether it's tablespoons, and what that's equal to in terms of grams. Once you've got that all set up and programmed, you just basically press the button, and it calculates inside the spreadsheet what all these factors are that you'll see in the nutritional panel, including total fat, calories, carbohydrate. Interestingly, the dietary fiber just meets the good source claim. So, your flour is a good source of fiber. Thank gosh. And then also it calculated the vitamin D, calcium, iron, and potassium levels. And we see that there's actually a significant amount of iron in this product. So protein 3 grams, fiber 3 grams. So that's a model label. Hopefully it's close to what your actual label is, Don. Okay.
Yeah, that looks great. And thanks for taking those and getting them. You said they're in Genesis. You entered them in Genesis.
Yeah, I found those on the USDA site and just entered them right into Genesis.
Okay, that's super. Thanks for doing that. And the label looks great. This mock label you created.
So I've taken a bread made from a recipe, a whole wheat bread recipe, and I've embedded that into a kind of a sandwich here. And you can see what I've done. On the upper left-hand corner, you'll see the formulation, where I've got 2 slices of bread, 50 grams. I've got a couple of ounces of turkey, mayonnaise, some mustard, lettuce, pickles, jalapenos, which I like, and tomatoes. And then we ran the spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet generated all the data I need for establishing a label showing 270 grams of, 270 calories and a 140 gram RACC. Believe it or not, a sandwich has a RACC. It's 140 grams. And then it calculated the critical macros and the critical micro minerals and the micronutrients. All of them are in the label. That's basically a camera-ready label if that passes through legal review. Mm-hmm. One thing I want to make sure everyone is aware of is that when you use any kind of a software to create a label for you, it's kind of a draft, and you need to make sure that you go over that draft to make sure everything is actually correct. Don't trust the software to do everything for you, and then have your, if you're in a company big enough to have a regulatory person or somebody that handles legal, have them take a look at it first before you send it out and have products made with that label on it.
There's just a few more points depending on your interest level, but just so you know, there are 3 types of health claims. 2 of these need FDA, 2 of these do not need FDA approval. 1 does. So you can make, as we've done, I think, through this lecture, you can make nutrient contents claims. It doesn't need FDA approval. You need to have your records ready. You can make a structure function where you're linking a nutrient with a structure of the body, bone density, or a function of the body, regularity. So qualified health claims are a little more detailed, and I won't talk about those. Here's some different nutrient content claims, and I think Kim's touched on those before. You can get the comparative claims. You can say you're light or you're reduced, or you can say you're free or good source. I wanted to touch on gluten-free claims. This information is in here. You need to be under 20 parts per million in order to make a gluten-free claim. And this specifically is saying you can't make a gluten-free claim on any gluten-containing ingredients. Well, that makes sense. But if you have to, so cannot contain any gluten-containing ingredients or grains, cannot contain any ingredients derived from gluten-containing ingredients. But you could have wheat starch if it's been proved. So it's the protein, remember, that's causing the response. So you could have wheat starch if it's been tested. But in any case, if it does say wheat on the label, because it's confusing to consumers, you would have to say this wheat has been processed to allow to make those claims. There's no different definition for the FDA nor the USDA for the term natural. It's used quite often. Whole grain, as we know, has to have essentially the same relative proportions of the components as they exist in the intact grain. I noticed BKW is organic certified. That's a whole nother lecture. As of January of 2022, if you do have bioengineered products, you're going to have this symbol on it. This is a relatively new mandate that came down this January. Here is a list of the 13 foods that are approved as GMO foods in the United States. Wheat is currently not considered GMO. And what we really wanted to do is supply you with more tools. If you need aflatoxin testing or micro testing, Dr. Ravishankar's lab does fee for service. If you want your products tested for micronutrients for a label, that can be done 3 weeks, $300 by Dr. Sam Garcia's lab up on Campbell. There's some other links here. I think AIB might be very appropriate for bakers. They will calculate labels for you. They will do the software work. They have the software, they'll do it for you, as opposed to buying the software, which is what Genesis does. So these are just some suggestions. And these are links that we used through the presentation that you can refer to. Mostly, I think that the really good one is the FDA Food Labeling Nutrition Industry Resources. It's got a lot of detail, more detail than we gave you. Yeah.
That's great. Also, just want to comment that it is actually possible to get FDA to answer a question once in a while. If you send, there's actually nutrition section at FDA, and I recently sent them a note, and they got back to me 3 or 4 days later with a detailed response, which surprised me.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much for that presentation. That was very informative. Does anybody have any questions?
And yes, they can have the slide deck for sure. I will send that to you, Sophia.
Awesome.
I'm just looking through some of the chats.
Yeah.
And
can I include both of your emails if anyone has any questions?
Sure.
Right. And that's what we kind of wanted to say is, I mean, this is so much to throw at you, and you need to think about it. And we're open with our emails, just ask us questions and we'll answer them or direct you to where you can get answers. I'm happy to show anybody if they want to play with Excel. We can try to put something together.
If you guys are in Tucson and you want to take a look at how the Genesis works while one of us there, we can show you that too.
Right. Need to learn more about cocktails. You certainly have. What kind of cocktails are you talking about? Like prickly pear and something, or?
Yeah, it's a base recipe for our flagship product, and then it'll have, you know, a seasonal iteration, a standard one, and the best-selling flavor. But this was very informative to me, and it gave me a lot of base information, because I'm still gathering so much information, and then I'm going to have to select my order of operations. So I appreciate this information very much. I don't have any questions yet, but I will.
Yeah,
I'll be looking forward to hearing more about what you're doing, Rachel. That sounds interesting.
Yeah,
thank you. Yeah, there's so many directions, and shelf stability is really complicated, especially if it's not wanting to change the integrity of the product or put in other things that weren't originally in it, and to represent the region and how to source those ingredients and maintain them is a chapter I'll get into next. So I feel very excited because there's some good information in here to segue into that for me. So thank you again.
You're welcome.
And then Rosemarie with her frozen foods, I think you could really help her, Kim.
Yeah. What I wanted to know is, like, if you do because that's the thing I'm worried about, is the taste or quality, changing it. And so I want to know, if you do frozen food, are you required to use preservatives?
No, you're not required to use preservatives. It's best practice to do a kind of a frozen shelf stability study, and that has to be done with a kind of, you cycle the temperature in a freezer for a period of time, and then do a sensory test after, say, a month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, to see at what point in time the product becomes less edible. And believe it or not,
that's true.
Yeah, foods.
You have to stimulate a shopper, goes to the grocery, puts it in the cart, sees their friend in the parking lot, it thaws out, they get home, they freeze.
Tamales can go bad.
Their kid takes it out, they don't really want them, they go back in. So it's that freeze-thaw cycling, and that's why some of the additives are added to keep that from icing off and separating. Yeah.
Because they get like the corn, just the cheese and chili ones, those can get bitter after so long. And then the meat ones, I guess maybe just freezer burn, you know?
Sure, that's drying out. That's a lot of packaging, I think, right there.
Yeah, I would just want a short shelf life, like something, you know? Yeah.
I mean, in your product development, you can put together like a couple of months of shelf life study in a kind of a freezer where you can maybe cycle the temperature somehow, and then get a really good idea of how it's going to perform in the worst case scenario.
Okay, interesting. Thank you.
Are there local labs that you know of that do like beverage shelf stability testing?
I think actually Covance will do that kind of work for you on a custom basis. They've done it for me before. It's worth asking them.
Okay, thank you.
You know, I wonder if, and are you, because there's the food safety shelf life concerns, but then there's the quality shelf life concerns.
Right.
I'm thinking from a micro standpoint that it's a long name, Dr. Rabashankar, she's great. And she has a lab and she does fee for service, and she would do like the food safety angle, making sure that it's safe after so long.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Tedley, because that's really one of the most important quality things you can do, is get your micro testing done on everything you release to the market.
Micro testing?
Yep, on a batch basis, you're micro testing. Like if you make 1,000 units of something, you want to have a certain number that you test from each batch, and then you can determine whether your batch is safe.
Okay.
Yeah,
Great.
No questions here, but just want to thank you both. This has been really interesting and hugely helpful. So appreciate your time and detailed knowledge. Yeah, you know, it's something we all see and use every day, but we don't know how they get to it. Now we all have some insider information. So
I would love to see your operation sometime. Where are you located?
So we are we're in the Fort Lowell Village. So I don't know if you've been to Don's Bread Shop.
I haven't been there yet.
I have. We should go, Kim. It's amazing.
That'd be great.
Yeah. We'll connect you guys and link you to where we're at, and make sure you get some bread. So
thanks, John. Thank you, Don.
Well, let's not let this be the last time we talk. Let's let this be the beginning of when we talk. And you know, that's part of our purpose in our department, is to help local food operations grow and do it right and safe and within regulations. We're busy people, yes, but I know, coming from Scott, it's a mandate to help the community. So.
If we can link you into expertise and resources, we'll do everything we can to help you.
You mentioned packaging has contributes to stability.
Oh yeah.
Do you have you guys also have resources for that in addition to things like labs?
I think we can help you identify the technical experts and the companies that are really good at packaging.
I imagine that the packaging affects the safety of the product. So, you know, like if it goes to the lab, say it goes to Ravi Shankar's lab, does it have to be in the vessel it would be going into?
The final package that
right.
can take to market.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. A lot of reasons.
I'm sorry, just a sec.
Oxygen, all that. Oh, so sorry, Sophia.
I really have to go. I have to pick up my son from daycare, but John is the host now, so you guys can keep talking. But thank you so much.
This is great.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks.
you.
Thanks for all your preparation and your outreach to the community.
Thank you. All right.
Thank
Take
you.
care, you guys. Good luck.
Thank you. Awesome work. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.